Tonight, I'd like to first introduce Doug Smith from the Good Food Store, who has provided us with this delicious Southern food tonight. He's the director and sometimes instructor of the cooking school at the Good Food Store. Prior to that, he helped create the wine department for the new store and cooked at Perugia when that restaurant was around, and the Redbird restaurant. You may also have seen him in a local band called the Volumen, which is very popular. So tonight he'll be talking a little bit about the Southern food that you're enjoying as we speak. So let's welcome Doug Smith.
Thanks, Molly. First of all, thanks to the Missoula Public Library, and again, Molly, for asking me to do this. I always jump at a chance to cook food outside of the Good Food Store. It's gets me out of my little office there, and anytime I can cook soul food and use bacon, that's even more of a reason to cook outside. So again, my name is Doug Smith, and I haven't read this since like 7th grade, so it's been a while, so forgive me, but I do have some referencing. I want to talk a little bit about the food back there. The menu is collard greens with maple syrup. I'm from Texas originally, so I didn't get so deep in the South that I remember a lot of how my grandmother and family cooked their collards, but I think that they probably overdid them. So I just sauteed these real quick and with some onions and then butter, olive oil, and then finished it with a little bit of, there's a little bourbon in there. You got to have bourbon and maple syrup. Researching some of the foods in To Kill a Mockingbird, it's just dessert upon dessert upon dessert. And they love their sweets, and of course they love the meats. And I think there's one reference there where they're at dinner, and there's 3 kinds of meat served. So there's that dish, and then there's crackling bread, and the crackling bread originally is fried pork skin and mixed into the cornbread. This version has bacon and some organic bacon and hominy, and there's many different versions, but that's what I chose. And then next we had some classic cold fried chicken, and incidentally there's recipes back there if anyone wants to grab them, take them home. And then there's ambrosia, which is something I remember my grandmother making, very classic kind of, to me, that's my grandmother to me. It's very simple. None of the foods back there are a big culinary challenge, but this ambrosia has some flathead cherries, and I think that was the one little punch to the south I wanted to show, is that, hey, Montana has some fruit too. So there's that, and that's just mixed with pecans, classic pecans from the south, and some coconut. And then last, we have the lane cake. And I did not make that, but a baker at the Good Food Store did. I'm not a baker. Shelley DeWeese made that, she's great. And there's also pecans and coconut nut, as you probably noticed. And I think there's a huge African-American influence, obviously, in the South, which in turn there's things brought over from Africa and the Caribbean, like coconut. And, they talk about asafoetida in the book, and asafoetida is typically a Indian spice, but they used it as a kind of a cure-all, I believe, for whatever ails you. And I think specifically it was either for indigestion or maybe diarrhea. I can't remember the exact reference, but I thought that was really interesting that they're using that spice. Tons of food mentioned in To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not going to go through everything, but of course those things, and some interesting things I found though, like scuppernongs. Anybody know what scuppernongs are? You guys? Grapes, right? Yeah. And I think you could probably make wine from them grapes. So that also refers to wine. And it's a sweet cake, or a sweet wine and grape. And of course peaches and pumpkins and hot biscuits and things like that. And it's cool that they even talked about Coca-Cola and I think knee-high may have been one. And there was also the gum that Scout found was, what's the brand name of the gum? Juicy Fruit or Wrigley's? It's a brand name. So it's cool that they even tied it in some brand names of food. I do have some quick references, and I'm not going to talk long because, you could get going into gender roles. There's a part where in the book where it says, boys don't cook. And, well, I think things have probably changed. And I'm probably not the best person to go into depth of all of the idiosyncrasies and of the food that's provided and talked about in the book, but it's still pretty interesting. Real quick, going back to the collard greens, I think there's their reference was don't step in the collard patch or something like that. And then with the crackling bread, Calpurnia, didn't make it often, but when she did it, they really liked it. I think that was in there. And then the ambrosia was a reference with Calpurnia's family for Christmas dinner. She made an ambrosia. And if someone, correct me if I'm wrong. But my favorite reference was the Lane cake. And there's two references. But the second time that it's referred to in the book, I cried when I heard this and when I read this. And I might start again. I don't know why I cried, but it was so cute. But before I start crying, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Lane cake. It's an Alabama specialty and created by a woman named Emma Rylander Lane, hence the name, Lane cake. She wrote a cookbook in the 20th century called Some Good Things to Eat. Real simple. I love it. The cool thing is Emma Lane won first prize in the Columbus, Georgia County Fair because of this cake. And she says, I'm going to name it First Prize Cake. And one of her girlfriends or friends said, no, why don't you give yourself some credit? Why don't you call it, Lane cake? Name it after yourself. And so she did, and she changed that. And I think there's probably several different versions, and this is a version I happened to find. And typically it's just a large white cake with egg yolks and sugar and raisins, pecans, coconut, and lots of bourbon. So the quote that I love so much is, let's see, how does it set up? Aunt Alexandra, it's a welcome gift to Aunt Alexandra by Miss Maudie. And Scout's talking, and she's reflecting on this, and she said, Miss Maudie baked the Lane cake so loaded with shiny it made me tight. Oh. That is awesome. So what is shiny? Moonshine. Got lots of liquor in there. I'm feeling pretty tight. Woo! Had a lot to drink that night. I love that expression, and I started thinking about it. And when I had a kitchen job, and we had an African-American dishwasher, and I saw him out on the town once, and I said, hey, how you doing, Lonnie? He said, I'm feeling pretty tight. And I thought, wow, I like that. And I forgot it since, and here it is again. So I thought that was so cute that Scout said that. Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about other foods in the book? I mean, when Walter got in a fight with Scout, and they brought him back, and I'm starting to get a southern accent. I don't know why, it's contagious. They brought him back, and they started feeding him all this food, and Scout looked over and said, you're dumping molasses over everything. And Calpurnia said, get out of here. And she took him out. She took Scout out and told her to be nice. But I have molasses back there for anybody who cares to dump it all over their food. And I did make some molasses butter for the cornbread. But does anyone else want to share some things in the book that they saw that, that's kind of neat? I mean, there's divinity, which are little white fudge cookies that were brought. People were leaving food on the back porch of Atticus.
Could I ask you about your reference to hominy?
Sure.
What is it?
Hominy is corn, but it's treated with lye. Right, it's treated with lye, so it's a little larger. You can use corn in this, and I like hominy's texture. I don't think that's necessarily in the book, but just something I wanted to throw in. What other references anybody noticed in the book?
In some parts of the South, hominy refers to cooked grits.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So in Charleston, for example, if you refer to that stuff on your plate with the eggs and so forth as grits, you will be corrected.
Really? Because it's hominy. Right. And I understand. Well, that's interesting. And, you know, lunch is actually called dinner. And then we're going to, about 6, 7 o'clock at night, you have supper. And I remember that from growing up, too.
Because it's a substantial meal, isn't it? Usually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. You know, and I think they other foods mentioned, I mean, coffee, squirrel, they talked about. Of course, milk and molasses and crackers, bacon, possum, rabbit, potato salad, potatoes. And toward the end, the great salute to our friend the pig. Scout dresses up like a ham. And I love the part where someone grabs her ham hock, or by the hock or something like that. Instead of grabbing her hand, grab the ham hock. So I think I'm excited about Southern food, and I think this book encompasses so many things, and it's cool that they actually touch on food because food is such a huge part of the Southern culture, you know. And again, there's so many things brought out by the foods, and it just brings the book more into life a lot more. Any other comments, ideas, questions?
This food is heavenly.
Oh, good. Real simple. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carl?
I think you'll give Paula Dean a run for her money, Doug. And if we ever do this again, Molly, you and I should dress up as Montana's agricultural products.
Yeah.
That could be fun. Well, welcome to our third evening lecture series of Inside Mockingbird. We've had lots of programming going on, not just 3 events, but this is the third of our events featuring our special guest, Claudia Durst-Johnson. I do want to thank our sponsors of these events. They include the Good Food Store, Rocky Mountain Management Services, Humanities Montana, David Moomey, and the Library Friends and the Library Foundation. One way that you can help us at the library and thank the library is by filling out an evaluation tonight before you leave. And just jot down a couple things to help us know how you like this program and what you'd like to see in the future. And that's your only ticket to admission. I do want you to be aware also tomorrow at noon here in the library, bring your brown bag lunch. The Montana historian Barbara Behan will be doing a program on Jim Crow and white-black relations in early territorial Montana. And that will include a short or some slides of old photos that she's found in the research that she's done. And she'll go into it with over an hour or so tomorrow. But it's interesting to know that Montana, some of us look at a novel like To Kill a Mockingbird and we think of it as kind of an exotic story set in an exotic place and time. But Montana used to have very big, thriving African American communities. Not so much anymore, but used to. So Barbara will share that with us tomorrow in this room at noon. And I hope you can join us and bring a friend and tell your friends. So tonight's program is Inside the Gothic Tower, the literary heritage of To Kill a Mockingbird. Claudia Durst-Johnson has been with us for about 4 days now. She's getting to know Missoula and Montana quite well. She published the first book of criticism on Mockingbird in 1997, right? And that's pretty amazing that there wasn't a book of criticism until just a short time ago. And maybe we can ask Claudia later what she thinks about that and why. And she's possibly published more than any other person on the book. Her most recent book is on another topic. It's called Church and Stage, the Theater as Target of Religious Condemnation in 19th Century America. And I think that's all I'll talk about Claudia right now. We'll have her come up and share her topic with us.
Well, all week in both the schools and with the teachers. Did I do something?
I don't know.
We've been talking about social issues connected with the novel, the issue of race, the issue of class, the issue of gender, the Great Depression, all social issues. And tonight we're going to do a radical departure by looking at the book literarily. I thought today we would focus on one of the most important literary features of the novel, which is the narrator's use of the literary form called the Gothic, which is a time-honored Southern tradition, starting with Edgar Allan Poe and going right through William Faulkner and a whole lot of other writers. I wanted to ask you first, real quick, to tell me some of your favorite Gothic novels. Come on, you know.
Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter, okay. Anything else? You ever heard of Dracula? Hmm?
Is it Gothic?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Frankenstein. Just many other all of Poe's stories are Gothic stories.
Hoffman? Hoffman? E.T.A. Hoffman.
I don't know that one.
He wrote The Sandman.
Oh. Well, the Gothic became popular in 18th century Britain. And those of you who know Jane Austen, she wrote a parody of the Gothic in Northanger Abbey. There have been other writers who have parodied the Gothic, one of whom is Mark Twain. But in a sense, Mockingbird is a parody of the Gothic, especially through Dill. You remember that moment when Dill comes into town and said his parents had locked him in a dungeon with bars on the windows, and a passing farmer had kept him alive by pushing peas through the bars. You know, he's just like the Man in the Iron Mask, or some of the Gothic romantic thing. And I must say, before I delved into the concept of the Gothic, the word conjured up for me Vincent Price in a spooky rendition of Edgar Allan Poe, or a bodice-ripping period piece by some romance novelist. But it's much more than that. The Gothic is much, much more than that. We're just looking now at at outer forms of the Gothic, and looking at the novel, and then we'll go beyond that. I have 9 characteristics of the Gothic that will connect with the novel. 1, ghosts and ghost houses. Number 2, vampires and monsters. Number 3, witches. Number 4, forebodings of evil. Number 5, dark secrets. Number 6, madness. Number 7, eccentricity. Number 8, imprisonment. And number 9, sick nostalgia for the past. Well, I'll let you help me out here. Point 1, ghost and ghost houses. Boo Radley, his house. And also Mrs. DuBose's house is considered a ghost house. Vampires and monsters. You know, there's a mention in several instances of the Dracula film that had just come out. Bela Lugosi, one of the most famous films ever. And Dill gets his way into this little clique of Jim and Scout, especially Jim, by telling him, I've seen that movie. And of course, the assumption is that Jim and Scout have read Dracula. Vampire. There is the story around town that Boo goes out at night and eats raw squirrels and stuff. A very vampirish thing there as well. And as well in this novel, black people are sometimes portrayed as monsters. Number 3, witches. Who's the witch? Mrs. DuBose. You remember how terrified they are of her? Terrified to go in that house? 4, madness. What do you see there? Huh? Yeah, I guess the dog. Boo, certainly in the Gothic tradition. And there's even a story of a Finch cousin who went to the University of Alabama and tried to kill the president with a gun. A lot of us were sympathetic with that at the University of Alabama. But he's been placed in the mental institution of the state, which is in Tuscaloosa, where Harper Lee went to college. Then we have dark secrets behind doors. Who do you have there? What do you have there? Mrs. DuBose again. The Ewells. Absolutely. The Radleys. Nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors, according to Miss Maudie. And Raymond Dolphus. You remember the man that is hanging around the courthouse, drinking out of a paper sack, a bottle in a paper sack? He has been married, or has as a common law wife, a black woman, and he has a crew of children. And of course, one of the dark secrets is the children learn there's no whiskey in that sack. He's drinking Coke. And they ask him why. And he said, well, this is the only way they will understand why I have black children. Because they can believe that a drunk would do it, but they can't believe any other kind of person would do that. And so I accommodate them. What about eccentricities? You're right. You're right. All of them. Everybody on the street is very weird. The man who pees off the front porch, and the old lady who takes a great shot of whiskey every morning, or is it every night? Because she once thought she saw a snake in the closet. Dill is eccentric. Atticus is eccentric, isn't he? Scout certainly is. Miss Maudie certainly is. And you go on and on. There are no eccentric people in here. And I start thinking, are there any people that aren't eccentric? The more you know about a person, you realize the more they are not this ideal gung-ho American. There are things behind closed doors of everybody, not just of certain houses. Secrets as well. The newspaper editor, how does he cover the news? He gossip and he looks out his window. He never leaves the office, looks out the window and writes up what goes on. The seventh one, sick nostalgia for the past. Who would that be? Mrs. DuBose. You remember she sleeps with a Confederate pistol. And if that's not sick nostalgia for the past, I don't know what is. We also see her attitude, shouting racial epithets at the children as they walk by because of what their father is doing. It's also very interesting, and I think I brought this up last night, so it'd be a repetition for you. It is very important to know the book she asked Atticus, Jim, to read to her. You remember what it is? Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. And that is important because this author is credited with being the foundation of pre-Civil War culture. The whole, fighting to the death for my honor. You looked at me wrong. You said something to a friend of mine, therefore I will fight you for my honor. The duels, all that kind of crazy crap. And he was enormously popular in the South. Mark Twain, it's just not just me that's saying this, understand. Mark Twain said Sir Walter Scott caused the Civil War. And when in Huck Finn, you see this boatload, this ship on the Mississippi River, it's sinking. It is filled with murderers and thieves. And what is the boat called? Mark Twain called it the Sir Walter Scott. So that connection of Walter Scott with the kind of sick past of the Civil War or pre-Civil War days certainly puts her in the category of someone who has a sick nostalgia for the past. And in fact, other people in town have that as well. Anne Alexander, looking back at their relatives, their wonderful relatives and all that kind of thing. The eighth one is a characteristic of the Gothic, is imprisonment and boundaries. What about the cousin who was incarcerated in the mental institution? What about all the metaphoric prisons? Not just the literal jail in which Boo Radley was taken at one time, not just the jail in which Tom Robinson is, but other kinds of jails. The walls of the house that Boo Radley is incarcerated in. The dungeon-like jail, and the walls of the Ewell house. Barriers were created by the Radleys' narrow religion. You remember his family, all the other neighbors go out and visit each other on Sunday, help each other out, and cheer each other up. But the Radleys, no. They never go outside their house. And then there are other boundaries. Gender is a boundary. Scout, speaking of her own, of being pushed into young Southern bellehood, describing it as a pink penitentiary descending over her. Segregation creates boundaries, right? Between the African Americans in the balcony and the white people in the main courtroom. Their boundaries even created with the segregation of the jail. Whites go one place, blacks are put in another place. And we can go on and on and on about that alone. Separate neighborhoods, separate stores, separate doctors, separate dentists, separate schools, though in this case there are no, the boundaries of the white schools keep blacks away and there's no other place for them. Boundaries of ignorance. Well, the prisons of race and class that breed injustice and discrimination make up the social theme of To Kill a Mockingbird. But they also, that is the Gothic, point to the way to the novel's more universal, higher plane, not just something set in a certain place at a certain time. It's one that transcends time and place and speaks of the individual's spiritual journey. The children's spiritual journeys begin with their fear of, attraction to, and encounters with, which, for want of a better word, I have to call the other. That is, the world of the not self, the different one from me. People or worlds radically different from us. And I talked about this with the kids, the high school kids, in that some of them seem to be, like the KKK we were talking about. They're afraid of a wide world. They're afraid of difference. And that's why the KKK was able to operate. To keep out the Jews, to keep out the blacks, to keep out the Catholics. And it's kind of a tiny little world. Who would want such a tiny little world in which everyone is just like him? I can't understand it. And yet this community is so described, using the word incest in more than one occasion. Inbred, not opening up. But these children are not like that. These children want to know difference. And the first instance of that is Boo Radley. In its extreme form in the Gothic tradition, difference is manifested in the vampire, the person who is can cross the boundaries between life and death. The werewolf, the space alien, all crossing certain essential boundaries. The other, any entity markedly different from the sheltered self, can conceivably take many forms, diverging radically from the supposedly rational, innocent self, and far removed from the social strictures of one's own narrow world. It is often perceived in the person of another race. Between oneself and the other is always a seemingly impenetrable barrier, like the walls of the Radley house. One critic, William Patrick Day, writes of the universal dread and desire that the barrier between self and the other will be broken through. The theory is basically this: we fear and are attracted to difference, And in the process of encountering it, we realize our kinship with it. In To Kill a Mockingbird, it is illustrated in the first half of the novel by the children's fear and attraction to the man who has been turned into a monster by the community. In the last half of the novel, it is seen most plainly in the community's demonization of the African American and in its terror that the boundaries between self, the whites, and the other, blacks, will be torn away in that strongest of community taboos, miscegenation. The children see their encounter with what they imagine to be the insidious Arthur Radley, the manifestation of the other in the first of the book, as a turning point in their lives. We learn that Jim later believes the traumas they lived through in that summer, leading to Ewell's attack on him, quote, began the summer Dill came to us, when Dill first gave us the idea of making Boo Radley come out, unquote. Both the horror and the attraction of difference in the person of Boo Radley is intensified in the children's association of him with the vampire figure. The children's encounter with difference comprise a rite of passage, especially for Jim, who, having entered puberty at the time of Tom Robinson's trial, embraces the other in Tom, suffering with him, doing what his father has always told the children to do, to get into the skin of other people, to see how they feel. In the course of this painful evolvement, Jim and Scout also are able to take the hand of Arthur Radley. Just as being stereotyped is like being in a Gothic prison, so small-mindedness and prejudice is also like being imprisoned. In such a community where these boundaries are so entrenched, chaos erupts whenever these restricted boundaries are breached. So the Ewell's children who come into the city schools for the first day cause all hell to break loose. Chaos erupts when a poor Cunningham child has lunch inside the house of the town's attorney and state representative. When white children attend a black church, chaos erupts outside before they get inside. When an Old Sarah mob invades the town of Macomb for the purpose of a lynching, chaos erupts. And when a poor white woman persuades a black man to come inside the Ewell fence and then the Ewell house, tragedy ensues. To Kill a Mockingbird invites the conclusion that we reach some sense of self-identity by our encounters with other unknown forces alien to our commonplace lives. Sometimes these encounters occur through experience, but sometimes through reading. An absolutely fundamental topic of this novel. We also experience and embrace a heretofore unknown quality within ourselves, the other within our own skins. Atticus will say repeatedly that you can never understand a person, quote, I've said this before, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it, unquote. And Scout, following his advice, tries, quote, to climb into Jim's skin and walk in it, unquote, in order to understand this boy who is going through puberty. At the end, she stands on Boo Radley's porch and tries to see the world as he has seen it. She enacts a mythic epiphany by which we all embrace the other, the different one, not only outside but inside ourselves. The horror no longer terrifies us. Instead, it becomes familiar. And through our experience, we are joined with, rather than isolated in terror, by the world. Another Gothic writer, Edgar Allan Poe, writes that each of us has an urge to know transcendental truth with a capital T. He called it supernal beauty, some unknowable spiritual territory beyond the natural world of matter. Some people call it God. Poe said, "Our world is, after all, only appearance, not reality. The Bible says, here we see through a glass darkly." Still, the human being longs for some glimpse, however brief it must be, of spiritual truth in this life. This is granted us in moments of intense feeling. Poe would say it is most readily summoned up by terror. So the story that takes place in Macomb, Alabama, brings us an immediacy of experience as we and the children come face to face with our own sinister creations. It heightens our reactions, lifting us briefly into foreign territory where we suspect we have briefly glimpsed the truth. That's my address, and I'll take questions now of any kind. You don't have to talk about the Gothic necessarily.
I just been thinking what you just said about terror and man-made terror. Is it interesting then at the end that Scout tells Atticus when she wants him to read her a scary story while they're watching Jen sleep, and he says, "No, you've had enough terror for one night," and she says, "Oh, I wasn't afraid." Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could say something about that, if then how there's so many things to be afraid of in the novel, and then at the end she wasn't afraid.
Oh, I don't think she had been terrified of Boo for a long time. They had had that little conversation going in the tree. And she had just one night when she's watching the fire of Miss Maudie's house, she realizes that somebody has put a blanket around her. And Jim has the encounter with the trousers. So I don't think she had to be terrified, and we see that she is terrified of the Ewell attack. But I think those lines have to do with something much more fundamental than any kind of overt action. I think they have to do with her identification with Boo, and finally being able to take Mr. Radley by the hand and take him home, and then stand on the porch and look at the street through his eyes. And that it's much more than a happening. It's an interior epiphany that has occurred, I think. I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but yeah.
You know, that whole idea of seeing things from the other side also makes me think that in the trial, well, I haven't read the book in a long time, but from seeing the movie, I was reminded that in the trial, when Tom Robinson is brought to the point of saying that he felt sorry for a male, that was such a forbidden thing to say. Yeah. It probably was because it put white people on the side of being looked down on, which they were not accustomed to.
His words of a black man feeling sorry for a white woman was considered worse than rape. And when he says those words, he and Atticus and the prosecuting attorney know that the game is up. He's hung himself with those words.
Is that because it makes him higher than some large person?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people don't want people to feel sorry for them. I mean, a lot of people don't want, and especially you don't want someone that you dislike or that you're not on good terms with. You'd rather for him to say, I hate you, than, I feel sorry for you. You're so weak. You're so misled. I mean, I can't even work up hatred for you because you're such a pathetic case. And there's that kind of thing, I believe, in his statement there. And it also reminds us, along with other of his testimony, that he puts himself in a heroic mold because he knows that if he breaks that boundary into her yard, into a white woman's yard, young girl's yard, he is putting his life on the line. And yet he risks it because I felt sorry for her. So, one aspect of the tragic hero is that he gives up things that matter to him in order to do what he thinks should be done. And that's what Atticus does. He gives up his reputation, his good name with his family. He even puts his children's lives on the line to do what he thinks he should do.
That was something that was striking to me in the novel, how Atticus was such a compassionate figure that he couldn't believe that Tom Ewell would ever do anything more than spit in his face.
Yeah.
And he just was so unaware of
the depths of evil.
yeah, totally disbelieving that. And that's almost his fatal flaw,
Right. Right.
But he's such a wonderful figure throughout the book.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you note that it's a parody of Gothic, of this Gothic theme, because I think that Atticus really represents that parody, because everybody else is very closed off to him, and Atticus is the one that really teaches his children how to cross the lines, and how to open up the gates, and so I see that connection, the parody connection really well there.
Yeah. Well, they're putting on this play, this Gothic story of the next door neighbor who is mad as a hatter and maybe a vampire, stabbing his father in the leg with scissors. And of course that parody with Dill, all the Boo Radley stuff begins to be a parody, and you wonder what is the parody doing that is in line with what we've been talking about. It's taking something strange and horrifying and undercutting it, or it's taking an attitude toward what appears to be strange and horrifying and making fun of it.
Right, making a lightness.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
I understood what the introducer had said. Nobody had done any literary criticism before you had done so in the 90s?
Yeah, actually, I think 1999 was my second book on her.
What I'm wondering is...
It was earlier than that.
Oh.
The first one was a little earlier than that. What happened is I was asked to write an article. My field is not Southern literature. My field is the Puritans. And Hawthorne and Melville. But somebody asked all of the members of my department to write an article on Alabama literature as an honor, you know, to make into a book as an honor to one of the retiring faculty members. And I thought, geez, I don't know any Alabama writers. But then Harper Lee came to mind, and I began looking, and I could find no serious criticism. Well, let me tell you what I did find. I did find law articles. I found quite a few law articles. I found quite a few articles on Harper Lee in law books. And the articles I did find were sort of attempts at biography. You know, this is Scout is Harper Lee, Dill is Truman Capote, you know, that kind of thing. So no serious criticism whatsoever. And I, you know, as I was chair of that department for 12 years, and in English studies the whole time, and never once, no, I take it back, one time in one course did they teach To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was in a course on images of African Americans in literature. But they prided themselves on a specialty in Southern literature, but they never taught that novel. I think one reason is that we have to acknowledge is that there is only one work. She doesn't have a sizable canon, or much of any canon at all, except for this one work. And I think that probably created a reluctance to have the novel in a class on Southern literature, just a possibility. But it, I think also, it kind of got into this niche of children's literature. You know, for years and years and years, Huck Finn was not taught at the college level because it was considered a boys' book. And I think it kind of got into that niche. But I think also it is not easily deconstructed. You know, the recent literary trend. It's not a book that you would throw a lot of jargon at about what are the big words? Didn't we talk about that the other night? Globalization and post-colonial and marginalization and all those kind of things. I think it doesn't lend itself to that kind of approach. And there's another reason. I think this book is so popular with the general reader. In England, the home of Shakespeare and Milton and Dickens and Wordsworth, they do a survey every year asking the English to, we talked about this tonight, yeah, asking them to rank the best books in the English language. And do you know from the beginning of this survey, To Kill a Mockingbird has been sometimes 7 on that list, sometimes 3 in England. And of course we see it's never been out of print. It's been translated into multiple languages. it's rare to find a lawyer who doesn't say, this caused me to be a lawyer. So here you have it. It's so popular with the masses, it can't be a good literary work. And people don't try to read it. All right. Anyway, have you got any other questions or? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Boo Radley's character is a stereotype in Southern literature or any other, subcategory. Because it just occurred to me that Sling Blade is the same character, the main character in that movie. Are you familiar with Sling Blade? Well, it was a movie that came out probably 15, 20 years ago, and it was made, written, directed, and starred Billy Bob Thornton, who's an Arkansas. It's set in Arkansas, and it's the same kind of character as Boo Radley. And I was just wondering if, nothing else about it that I can think of now corresponds to Mockingbird. I was wondering if that's a transposable sort of.
I think it is. When they talk about the Gothic South, it really is Gothic, And in every community, there seem to be, that I'm familiar with down there, there's, in the older communities, there seemed to be someone who never left the house, or someone who was told never to leave the house. And, it's part of that Southern Gothic. And again, I think at the core of it is that self-protection, that sort of incestuous, inbred closing off of the world. That's what creates madness. That's what creates this cruel fear of people like black people and like ourselves. By the way, I wanted to tell you one thing kind of funny that I noticed today. We talked every night about there being an active Klan in Montana for about 8 years in the 20s, and the Klan was rising all over the place, New York State, everywhere. And they came to Montana, and who are they going to persecute? There's an insufficient number of blacks in Montana. And so maybe they'll turn to the Jews. Well, they couldn't find any Jews in Montana to speak of. So their target became Irish Catholics. Well, the funny thing is, I was looking in your book today, and there is a point in there when they're talking about the Klan, and Atticus says that the Klan is having a problem because they had harassed a merchant named Levi, and they weren't finding enough Jews around to make a fuss over. And he said, well, they'll be turning to the Catholics next. And that had completely gone past me. I thought Montana was unique in this respect, but evidently not.
So what book is that you're referring to?
Oh, she lent me her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh.
Yeah.
The discussion about Boo Radley being kind of a Gothic character reminds me of Truman Capote's book, Other Voices, Other Rooms, which I look at as a companion read, because it's the same kids.
Yeah.
Instead of him popping out from the bush into their world. You know, the little scout character, Idabel, pops out into his world in other rooms. And there's that very mysterious lady in the window of the old decrepit house that he lives in.
Yeah.
And maybe more than Mockingbird, to me, it's just steeped in Gothic.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And,
agree with you.
I think it's interesting how they take some of the same seeds of a common story,
And come up with such different narratives.
Harper Lee, and they go in very different
Yeah.
directions.
Yeah. It's certainly a southern thing. Lee told me a funny story once of going back to Monroeville from New York to visit her sister, and she said we took a ride around the countryside as we always did, and my sister told me, let's go by the cemetery. We haven't been by the cemetery in a long time. So they went out to the cemetery, and she said there was a room-high monument to Capote's mother. And she said it was the only monument she had ever seen that listed all of her ex-husbands. Well, you've been a good audience. Looks like you're questioned out, but I'll be glad to talk to you if you want to come up.